Was this season truly a failure for the Devils? Let's look back at the season in retrospective and see where the Devils go from here. Welcome to the first day of the offseason. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Steven stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils Wire for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. Good morning to all of you. Day one of the 2024 offseason is official for the New Jersey Devils. And I know this season ended in somewhat disappointing fashion for New Jersey, but I just want to say this. At least they're not the Flyers, and at least they're not the Red Wings, because the Red Wings, despite winning their game against Montreal Canadiens in a shootout, still got eliminated from playoff contention because the Washington Capitals ended up beating the Flyers. And remember, the Flyers were always somewhat competitive throughout the course of the year. They were always tops in the Metro, and they crashed and burned hard to close out the year. What a way for the regular season to end in the NHL. I know we still have a couple games still on the docket. Obviously, you got the final game in Arizona for the Coyotes. Austin Matthews is still searching for goal 70, and he's going to take on the Tampa Bay Lightning. That might be a bit of a challenge, but it doesn't change the fact that we are going to be months and months and months away from Devils hockey and a chance at redemption. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the season in general for New Jersey, and this is sort of a gateway into the offseason because I will share some of my key talking points throughout the course of the 2023-2024 season. Was it truly a failure, or were there just some certain circumstances that didn't go the Devils' way? Then in the second segment, I will highlight some things that we can all look forward to during the course of the offseason, because I think it's going to get a lot better for the Devils because they can go nowhere but up, right? And then in the third and final segment, I will give my thoughts on what do the Devils need to do moving forward, because Tom Fitzgerald didn't fix the issues last offseason, and it went underneath a lot of people's noses because he went big game hunting for a player like Tyler Toffoli, but now Tyler Toffoli is no longer on the roster. All right, let's begin with this basic recap of the season for the Devils. They finished 7th in the Metropolitan Division, second to last. They finished with a record of 38, 39, and 5. So at the conclusion of the season, they finished below 500. They allowed the first goal in 57 out of 82 games. Timo led the team in goals. Who saw that on their bingo card halfway through the year with 28? Jesper Bratt led the team in assists and points. Obviously, I think Jack Hughes would have led in a lot of categories for the Devils had he not been sidelined with a couple big injuries. But this sort of segues into my first discussion point in this segment, because NBA superstar Giannis Antetokounmpo went viral last year for a question that he was asked: was the season a failure for his team? Because they were the top seed in the Eastern Conference and they got bounced out by the eventual Eastern Conference champion Miami Heat. And his answer sparked a lot of debate amongst all the major sports, because what do you consider a failure in your eyes? Now, let's just cut to the chase. This season, in my opinion, was a failure for the Devils because they had a historic season last year. They made it to the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. They had a lot of expectations going into the year. Like I just mentioned, they were buyers at the trade deadline. They were buyers during the offseason. They got Timo Meier. They got Tyler Toffoli and Jack Hughes. He was in MVP discussions at the conclusion of the first month of the year because he was leading the NHL in a lot of categories. Lindy Ruff was a finalist for the Jack Adams Trophy. Nico Hischier, he was a finalist for the Selke Trophy. And it just seemed like this was the first step towards what could be a contending like team. Unfortunately, that's not how it panned out. Like I said, this season was a failure for the Devils because you go from having a historic season to now missing the playoffs, and you were never consistent. But I don't think they took as many steps backwards as people are making it out to be, because there were a few circumstances that unfortunately didn't go their way. The first being is injuries. The Devils dealt with a lot of injuries throughout the course of the year. Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Timo Meier, Dougie Hamilton. I know I'm missing a lot more. Curtis Lazar, he didn't finish out the season. Eric Haula, he missed a few games. Vitek Vanecek, prior to being dealt to San Jose, people forget he was out for a few weeks due to an undisclosed injury. And a lot of people need to take that into consideration, which is the Devils were never fully healthy. Compare that to last year, they were very healthy because Nico Hischier, he suited up in 81 out of the 82 potential games. Jesper Bratt, he played in all 82 games. Dougie Hamilton, I believe he played in all 82 games. Jack Hughes, he missed anywhere from 3 to 4 games. And look where the Devils went. They had a lot of camaraderie. They had a lot of chemistry. They had a lot of consistency because their star players were always out there. And this is a discussion that I've had on my show in years prior, because I remember the season prior to last year, it was a big talking point. Jesper Bratt, Nico Hischier, Jack Hughes, and Mackenzie Blackwood, they never shared the same sheet of ice for more than 30 or so games at one point, because each one of them was dealing with injury at some point. When one would return, it seemed like another went onto the injured list. And unfortunately, it's just come back to bite the Devils this time around. So if your team is injury plagued, what do you honestly expect, especially when they cannot establish that chemistry? And sometimes it might take a while for a particular player to get going. Case in point with Timo Meier, he struggled first half of the year, but he got it going towards the end of it, and he led the team in goals. Another thing that I need to talk about is the scandal that took place in January. And obviously, some things are more important than hockey, and I just want to put that out there. But Michael McLeod leaving the Devils to deal with what was going on in London, Ontario, definitely took a toll on the Devils. And I actually spoke to someone within the Devils organization, and they said that's when the ship kind of started to sink, because Michael McLeod, he was a great energizer. He improved on his offensive game. And not to mention, he was the best faceoff player in the entire NHL, and he still is. He could have broken the single season record, but obviously that just didn't pan out. And like I said, some things are more important than hockey. I'm not really going to touch on that. I've already discussed it in prior episodes, but that's another factor that you need to take into consideration, which is Michael McLeod saw himself in a scandal and it hurt the team. And a few other things that I want to factor in is that the Devils made a coaching change somewhat late in the season. They fired Lindy Ruff early March, and they were sellers at the deadline because they got rid of Tyler Toffoli when it was evident that the two sides couldn't come to an agreement for a contract extension. So when you take everything that I just said into consideration, the injuries, the scandals, the coaching change, being sellers at the deadline, you would think that this team is rebuilding and they're trying to contend for the first overall pick in this year's draft. But that's not the case for this Devils team. They have shown some signs of being a decent team, because one of the things I've been talking about on the show that I think needs to be highlighted a lot more, the Devils did win some crucial marquee matchups. Some of their notable marquee victories include a couple wins against the Toronto Maple Leafs, beating the Boston Bruins for the first time in a little over 2 years. You would have to go back to when Pavel Zacha was a member of the Devils, not the Bruins. They beat the Vegas Golden Knights one time this year. They came out victorious on Hughes Super Bowl day, in which all three Hughes brothers shared the same sheet of ice. I remember that game against the Chicago Blackhawks, in which Brendan Smith laid that big hit on Connor Bedard, and the Devils held on to win despite every single Blackhawks player hunting a Devils player down in retaliation for Brendan Smith hurting their highly touted rookie. And I just want to make a note that the Devils have won against some of those big name opponents, but what really did them in was losing some matchups to the San Jose Sharks, Arizona Coyotes, Ottawa Senators, Montreal Canadiens, Columbus Blue Jackets. The list goes on, and that's inexcusable. But I just wanted to let you guys know that the Devils did step up their game at some points of the season when they did have to go up against a well-known opponent that was probably favored to win the matchup. Here's another interesting fact. Yes, the Devils never won more than 3 games in a row, but they never lost more than 3 games in a row. It just goes to show you how stagnant this team was. They're not rebuilding. They're not getting rid of some of their key pieces. This is just a season that unfortunately was met with a lot of hiccups, bumps, and bruises, and now they're going to have to pick up the remains and see like what they can make out of it so that way they can get back into the playoffs. And I think this is going to be a summer rebuild for Tom Fitzgerald. It's not going to be a year by year rebuild. This is something that can be fixed within the next few months. But I did say during the course of the season that I don't think anything would be a quick fix for the Devils because it's too late in the year and you're going to have to readdress it come summertime. So going back to my point, yes, this season was a failure for the Devils, but I don't think they were as bad as people are portraying them to be because they did have a lot of good moments and they did showcase some capabilities here and there, just wildly inconsistent, dealing with injuries, dealing with some things that they honestly shouldn't have been dealing with, coaching change, being sellers at the deadline, and yet they were still always knocking on the playoff door, and they did not mathematically get eliminated from playoff contention until a few weeks ago. And I think that speaks volume as to the type of potential that this team has. And we're definitely going to talk more about this in a future episode, but just wanted to give you my thoughts on the matter. All right, we're going to talk about some of the things that people can look forward to for this Devils roster momentarily. But before we continue, let me tell you about FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Good thing my other team, the Los Angeles Lakers, are in the playoffs. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Please remember to gamble responsibly. All right. I think another big issue that plagued the Devils this year is that Tom Fitzgerald did not fix the issues that needed to be addressed last summer. And it went under a lot of people's noses, including mine, because I was confident in this Devils team going into the year. Now, like I said, some things just didn't go their way. That happens in sports all the time. But one of the things that people were discussing over the offseason was that would the Devils goaltending tandem of Vitek Vanecek and Akira Schmid, would that be enough to boost the Devils back into the playoffs and move the needle just a little bit? Because it was evident that Vitek Vanecek, he struggled mightily throughout the course of the playoffs. I think he had one of the worst goalie stats that playoff season, alongside with Marc-Andre Fleury, if my memory serves me well. And Akira Schmid, he performed nicely in the series against New York Rangers, shutting them out not once but twice. But come the Carolina Hurricane series, he kind of took a couple steps backwards. And Lindy Ruff, it seemed like he was pushing the envelope with Vanecek just a little bit more. Should have started Akira Schmid in that pivotal Game 4 matchup because Vitek Vanecek still wasn't really good despite the Devils winning in Game 3. But obviously that was almost a year ago. But talking about the Devils now, going into the offseason, people were concerned about the goaltending tandem, which led to a lot of people having these discussions whether or not Tom Fitzgerald should pursue a goalie, preferably Connor Hellebuyck. And I said, I would love to have Hellebuyck on the roster, but the problem is he might have been a little too expensive for the Devils' liking. Are you willing to gut your team for essentially a one-year rental? And then I was stunned when Hellebuyck ended up re-signing with the Winnipeg Jets because I surely thought he wanted out. And obviously, throughout the course of the year, people were looking at John Gibson, Elvis Merzlikins, UC Soros, and the big one, Jacob Markstrom, which I think that could be attainable for the Devils, but we'll talk about that in a future episode. And now it's on full display that the Devils need help at the goaltending position and also defensively, because I think one of the bigger issues for the Devils is that their defense is too soft. And I've talked about this extensively on my show. I've discussed it with Chico Resch, whether it was in private or on my show, is that I don't think it's pick or choose. I think it's a two-way street. Which one is easier for Tom Fitzgerald to pursue? I think he can get some more grit on the defensive side. Curtis McDermott can be used as a defenseman, just to be perfectly clear, but he was obviously used more as a forward. But digressing a little bit, now that Tom Fitzgerald sees the major issues that the Devils are having, because it's not their offense, it's their defense and their goaltending, I would expect Tom Fitzgerald to really make that a priority, because last year the priority was to re-sign Jesper Bratt, re-sign Timo Meier, maybe go after someone else. Tyler Toffoli reportedly wanted out of Calgary, and I didn't think the Devils were going to land him, and I was stunned when I heard the news that the Devils obtained him. And now it's just like, don't go for more offense. That's not the issue for the Devils. You need more steady defense, and you need someone who is good in between the pipes, and that's definitely going to take your organization to the next level, and I think that's what people are going to focus on. But I want people to be excited for this type of narrative, which is, this is not a rebuild year by year for Devils, like I said in segment 1, mainly because their core is still signed long-term. Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, Timo Meier, Dougie Hamilton. I guess you can throw in Andre Palat into the mix as well, because he's also signed to a long-term deal. Eric Haula, he's not going anywhere. There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle for Devils that are crucial, but the fact that they still have their main centerpieces here for the long run, I think that's another reason why fans should look forward to the future, because usually if you're rebuilding year by year, you have a lot of expiring contracts. You're wondering, should we get rid of them now? Should we wait till the season? How is this going to pan out? The Devils have all the time in the world with this core. And I think they know that. And now it's just a matter of, how do you meticulously make this team better without gutting the program, so that way you can become contenders in the NHL. And that's going to be a huge talking point for Tom Fitzgerald. And Ken Danico brought it up on the final telecast of the season. Is like, when you look at Jacob Markstrom, when you look at John Gibson, when you look at Connor Hellebuck, they do have their own personal issues dating back to last year. And I think another thing that Chico Resch also brought into the mix when he appeared on the show is that when you look at Andrei Vasilevsky, Igor Shesterkin, they all lost in the first round last season. Goaltending is going to be crucial for Devils, but it's not the only fix that this team needs. I still think they need some defense, but I've talked enough about that. And the Devils have trade capital. I've been looking at a few mock drafts, and obviously the lottery has not occurred yet, but some of these sites are projecting for the Devils to have the 10th overall pick. Maybe that could be a little higher. Fingers crossed. That could be huge for the Devils if they want to go big game hunting in the market. A few years ago, when the Devils had the 2nd overall pick, I was willing to part ways with that draft pick, because I was like, maybe the Devils can get like Alex DeBrincat, or maybe they could get Kevin Fiala, because both those players wanted out of their respective situations. It seemed like the organizations they were with at the time wanted to part ways as well, and maybe that can benefit the Devils a little bit. I know there was probably a hypothetical deal in the works for Matthew Tkachuk, but it fell through on draft night, and then a few weeks later, Matthew Tkachuk did want out of Calgary, and we saw how that panned out. I'd say the Devils have no interest in holding on to that draft pick. Maybe they'll use it as draft capital. I remember talking with Tom Fitzgerald last season, and he said, just because we don't have a first-round pick doesn't mean we won't get one. And he was alluding to the fact that if he can't come to an agreement with Jesper Bratt, he can use them as trade capital. And that's the thing. Fitzgerald has shown signs. He's not afraid to pull the trigger for a big-time offer, and we've seen this the last year or so. And I think that's what Devils fans can expect. And we'll get a better sense as to where some of these players' headspaces are at, particularly Coughlin. I'm curious to know if he's willing to return to the Devils. Does Tom Fitzgerald want him? Because when this episode goes live in a few hours, the players will do their exit interviews. And I believe Travis Green and Tom Fitzgerald will speak to the media on Thursday. But that's what I want people to look forward to, which is this Devils team still has a lot of potential, and you should still be very excited. I think people should still look forward to what is pending this offseason for Devils, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But before we continue, I want to tell you about Sleeper. Regardless of where the Devils finish in the standings, I want to remind you that you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. And you don't just have to participate in fantasy hockey. You can also partake in fantasy football, basketball, baseball, college football, all on Sleeper. All you have to do is pick weather studs like Connor McDavid, Alexander Ovechkin. Nathan McKinnon will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in given time. To win 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Devils fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention. Nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. All right, moving forward. I've said this in a previous episode. I don't think Tom Fitzgerald should be on the hot seat because he did make the Devils theoretically better on paper going into the season. It just didn't work for more reasons than one, like I discussed in segment 1. And he now knows what the issue is. You need to fix the goaltending and you need to fix the defense. And I'm sure he's going to get on the phone to see what he could potentially do, because last offseason, the Devils lost Damon Severson and Ryan Graves because both of them were pending unrestricted free agents and they were going to get paid immensely. That's why Fitzgerald pulled off the second sign and trade in NHL history with Severson, and he let Graves walk because he knew he couldn't afford to keep both of those players, especially since the priority was to resign Bratt and Meyer. And now you fix the forwards, and that's great and all. Devils have a lot of potential in terms of their offense, but similar to what Chico Resch discussed on this show, how do you give Shimon Nemeth and Luke Hughes 5+ years of experience? You can't. And the goaltending, Jake Allen and Kaapo Kähkönen, I think they were good to close out the season for the Devils, but remember, Akira Schmid and Vitek Vanecek were also pretty decent to close out the season. That's why Akira Schmid took Mackenzie Blackwood's spot at the very end of the season. Does anyone remember that? Because Mackenzie Blackwood was coming back from injury, he was struggling, and he was a healthy scratch throughout the course of the playoffs, thus making Akira Schmid the backup goalie. And I don't want Tom Fitzgerald to make that same mistake. Yes, Kähkönen and Allen were solid in that to close out the year, but make Jake Allen the backup. That's perfectly fine. But I think you need to go a little bit better in terms of goaltending. And if you can't get anyone else, then you might have no choice but to run it back. That's just my 2-cent opinion on the matter. But moving forward, yes, this season was a failure for the Devils. And I think they definitely disappointed a lot of people, including me. But I do have to take into consideration that they did showcase some skill set here and there, and some factors just didn't go their way. And that's just sports, and hopefully they can remain healthy next year. And I think another thing that we need to consider is that Dougie Hamilton, you don't know what you're missing until you don't have it. And Dougie Hamilton was important on this Devils roster. He was vital because he helped on the power play and he helped generate more offense for the Devils. And I'm definitely going to talk more about Dougie Hamilton's season in retrospective once exit interviews do come out, because I think that's the first time he's going to speak to the media since late November. But I think Dougie Hamilton, him going down with his injury, that was one of the first main domino pieces to fall for the Devils. So that's just my opinions on the matter, which is I know the season didn't go as planned, but let's not be Debbie Downers heading into the offseason. I'm confident that Tom Fitzgerald will pull a rabbit out of his hat and the Devils will take steps forward and they will be back in the playoffs come next year. I know I am jumping way ahead and this is just the first day of the offseason for the Devils, but I'm that confident that I'm sure things can get worked out. Let me know what you guys think. Did you think that this season was a failure for the Devils? If so, what are some of your reasons? If not, I'm also curious to your reasons. So leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X Page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X Page app at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's what time I have for you. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day in New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.